Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Brandy Brewer, and I'm a doctoral student at the University of Louisville. And today I am joined by Dr. Zach Rossetti. And we're going to discuss some diversity issues on behalf of the Council for Exceptional Children's Teacher Education Diversity Caucus. How are you doing this morning? Is it freezing in Boston yet?
It is a little colder. There's a saying, if you're a true New Englander, you don't turn on your heat until after Halloween. So I'm going with it. And it's actually my favorite season. It's vest season. I get to wear my black vest that makes me feel most comfortable when I teach and present and do things like this. So.
I love it. We also have that saying here in Kentucky. Well, at least my wife does. I don't know if it's a universal saying or if it's just a little bit of frugality. So Dr. Rossetti is an associate professor of special education in the teaching and learning department at BU. His research examines the social belonging and participation of people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And your specific focus is really on how educators and caregivers can, well, there are two focuses, right? How educators and caregivers can facilitate friendship opportunities for students with and without IDD. And also, you're doing a lot of work related to caregivers of students with IDD, specifically looking at language access and participation in IEP meetings, correct?
Yes, yeah. It started out looking at family advocacy and then focusing more so on the participation in language access due to learning about barriers, and I think we'll be talking a lot about those faced by immigrant families and racially, ethnically, culturally, linguistically diverse families in particular.
Yeah, well, and you and I have spoken. Caregiver support is near and dear to my heart. We are both caregivers ourselves, and I think that for me anyway, that the pandemic really spotlighted for me how caregiver support is vastly needed and underrated, I think.
Yeah, it was and still is challenging. For so many, and it certainly highlighted, especially for folks with, kind of unique intersectional harms or barriers related to multiple cultural identities. The importance of services and the, kind of delicate nature. COVID certainly interrupted that.
It certainly did. So can you tell us a little bit more? We've already started talking about your research here, but a little bit more about your role or your institution's role and then the focus of your research. Just expand a little bit on that for me.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for the introduction, and I'm happy to be here. Hello, everyone. I work in the Wheelock College of Education and Human Development at BU. And my colleagues and I, generally do research kind of looking at systems of education, special education, and those related medical, community. And so there's a lot of work that addresses some of these larger and systemic issues in which, teachers are teaching and students are learning. I have those two primary lines of research. I sometimes shorten them just as friendships and families. And I think I'll say quickly, my original and ongoing motivation in this work has a personal component. I was the oldest of 6 in my family, and one of my brother Todd, who was an amazing guy, huge Boston sports fan, very outgoing and social, and had a huge sweet tooth, and was taught me a lot. And one of the lessons that I always found so remarkable was just how social and socially connected he was, because it's sort of harder for me. And so as the older brother, I always kind of envied that. And then the other part of Todd's experiences was that he had cerebral palsy and didn't speak and used a wheelchair and needed lots of supports, pretty significant supports, just to kind of get through his day. So, when I growing up with him, I noticed early on that many people outside of our family, including teachers and classmates as he went through school, saw him differently, treated him differently than I did or we did in our family. And specific to the friendship research, he was included and he was accepted by nice, caring, well-intentioned classmates and adults, but he was never really befriended. He wasn't invited to birthday parties. He didn't get calls at home. Didn't see anyone outside of school usually other than family. And so that dynamic of being popular and well known, but not having an authentic friendship, like lots of people volunteer to help kind of that vertical relationship, being a helper or mentor, which is great. But there was nothing horizontal in terms of a reciprocal, authentic friendship that happened in and out of school. And so those dynamics were frustrating as a brother and very fascinating as a researcher. And so when I went back to school after being a special ed teacher and inclusion facilitator in New Hampshire, where we're from, I was, motivated by those. And then in terms of family, I started focusing on family school interactions, particularly in the IEP context, because my mother, who was a fierce, and still is, a fierce advocate, used to come home from these meetings and just be so angry or so upset. And when I was younger, I thought to myself, I remember clearly, like, what the heck is happening at these meetings that, result in this? And then, as I got older and became a teacher, I attended meetings with her. She was a single mom for a while of 5 of us. And I attended meetings. And then when I became a teacher, ran my own meetings and just, saw a lot of barriers, faced by families. At that time, it was largely white, some rural and, maybe lower SES, but largely white families. That was kind of my focus. And my career has included learning from and with Black and brown and non-English speaking families, about these additional, as I said, kind of unique barriers related to kind of the intersectionality of their multiple cultural identities. So the work now has been focusing on immigrant families, but those are some of the original and ongoing motivations of the friendship and family related research.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. I think it's easy to get lost in the fray sometimes when it comes to research and teaching, and the fact that you have this really personal connection to both of them. I can imagine. Well, it comes through in your work, right? That family focus, that friendship focus, that person-centered focus really comes through, and you're passionate about it does as well. And I've already told you I'm a large fan. So
yeah, no, I appreciate it. I mean, it is. I do consider it and to be kind of advocacy-based research and research-informed advocacy and teaching and kind of it's been really fun and interesting in my career to kind of do work in those areas.
Yeah.
And I should explicitly say quickly the friendship work, as you mentioned, is how teachers and caregivers can increase and improve social opportunities, and it definitely stems from a place of believing that students with the most significant support needs can and should be friends. And same
Right.
thing for the family work, like family IDEA mandates the opportunity to participate. And so all families should be able to participate. And the fact
Right.
that they aren't or can't is in the year 2022 is ridiculous.
Right. Well, and I think, that's, I think you and I would agree that that language can be used as a loophole, right? Because what's the definition of participation,
Yes.
and who gets to decide what that definition is? So this, so my next question is really about frameworks of or research methods that
Yeah,
that drive your work. So can you speak to that a little bit for me?
sure. In terms of, well, I guess I'll start with frameworks, theoretical frameworks. When I was in my doctoral program, I really latched on to or Goffman's stigma theory. I thought it was really helpful in terms of thinking about the um, process of people with visible differences, in this case intellectual or developmental disabilities that are noticeable to others, being kind of disqualified in the social arena. And it basically kind of articulated for me how ableism worked. I
Yeah.
also incorporated and incorporate lots of disability studies approaches, broadly looking at disability as socially, culturally, and politically constructed, and contextually dependent on one's environment. So that's been helpful in the friendship work.
Yeah.
Maybe the ongoing problems where most students with disabilities kind of feel most comfortable interacting as helpers or mentors, and probably learn that from teachers and enculturated into that in our system. Um, so that's been helpful there. And in terms of methods, a lot of the friendship research has been observational, looking at how kids with and without intellectual and developmental disabilities interact, what opportunities they might or might not have in classrooms, inclusive settings. Lots of kids are pulled out or may not be in inclusive settings that often. I love when I observe and always make sure, of course, to be in the hallways between classes, walking with kids or talking to them or teachers or paraprofessionals, and lunch and recess and after school, because all those quick kind of fleeting social times are critical. And I should say that the disability studies framework and the stigma framework have helped me. The approach I take in the friendship work is really looking at, in education research and in psychology and social psychology research, how anybody makes friends. Social skills may be helpful to some students with disabilities. We do that in special ed, but we focus too much, I think, on the kind of deficits of students with disabilities. And a lot of people think that they're addressing this social arena with social skills. And there are problems with that approach, namely that friendships involve two kids or more. And so the intervention should, approach both students with and without disabilities. So that's been an interesting and kind of direct way that some of these frameworks have affected, my work. And related to the family caregiver research, one of our recent articles in Exceptional Children that examined with a diverse sample caregivers' perspectives of the advocacy expectation, the expectation that they have to not just participate, but go above and beyond and advocate. We utilized the community cultural wealth framework by Tara Yoso. I don't know how to pronounce her last name. I've never met her. Which is a critical race theory challenge to Bordeaux's capital theory, which can and should be critiqued as centering white and dominant groups.
Right.
So that allowed us, to a kind of asset and strength focus for families that are traditionally marginalized in the special ed system, and it was really helpful. So in that research, I'm trying to also, center voices that traditionally have been marginalized, and so it's a lot of interview work, and we've used Sarah Lawrence Lightfoot's portraiture method and approach, and recognizing certainly that I am a white male researcher, cisgender, et cetera, with certain privileges, like really trying to center families' voices. And so we've, in constructing the portraits in our ongoing qualitative research, and if you haven't noticed, broadly it's qualitative work. We have engaged in co-construction with our family participants who we think of and work with as co-researchers. So that's been really exciting work.
Yeah, this is beautiful stuff that you're doing. I again want to just validate the authenticity of this line of work. I'm actually taking notes so that I can finish my own dissertation directly after this. So what extent do you, so we're talking a lot right now about your research and certainly how it is impacting community members and caregivers and students alike. How do you see, to what extent do you see your research and your work really influencing teacher education practice?
Yeah, I think I'll start with the family work first this time. I'm trying to figure out how to start. Sorry for the pause.
No, you're fine. I know for me, like that I really look at my work with caregivers specifically from a couple of lenses, right? Like obviously the hope that that my work will benefit and support and lessen the marginal gaps for caregivers, right? And also set a foundation for future teachers to really begin their operation from that place of compassion and understanding and empathy.
Yeah, I thank you for that. I approach my courses in the teacher preparation component of our jobs with a similar mindset, and so I when I teach, it's very much from a student focused and family focused lens, emphasizing strengths and assets of students and families and caregivers, and that really emphasizes their experiences in a system that is racist and ableist, and that's designed to help and provide appropriate services, but has, I think, white wealthy students and families in mind, or those are their
right. And yeah, and I don't mean to interrupt you, but I want to just add on there. I actually had this exact conversation with one of my committee members last night. Just this understanding of when you're doing research surrounding caregivers or with caregivers, there's generally historically this conversation that isn't had, but that needs to be had, that there are several different pockets of caregivers, right? And historically, research leans itself towards those caregivers who are capable and willing to participate in these research opportunities. And that is not,
Right.
that in and of itself really adds to those gaps for caregivers with regard to opportunities to even participate in research. You know, a certain
It
amount of
definitely,
money. Yeah, go
yeah,
ahead.
no, it definitely does. And it's, you know, and I think in terms of teacher practice, um, you know, the related to that and what we've been discussing, the central problem of you know, participation in children's education at school has meant certain things, and related to the problems we're describing, it's meant the ways that many white wealthy families have participated. You know, the traditional capital theory, the social capital and cultural capital that white families and caregivers have, that they share with the teaching force, which is predominantly white. And so, you know, teaching about these problems and emphasizing, you know, how to, you know, learn about, learn from, learn with uh, families, you know, with multiple racial, ethnic, cultural, linguistic identities is critical. It needs to be part of this work. I mean, even just emphasizing, you know, broadly speaking, and when I say, you know, relationships with families, I mean all families and families that have been traditionally marginalized, but emphasizing to students the importance of relationships, not just with their, emphasizing to our students the importance of relationships, not just with students, but with students' families. And Kathleen Kaisar and Grace Francis and Shauna Haynes and some others, you know, have done research showing, and others have done research showing that for many new teachers, interacting with families, you know, is valued, but often the hardest part of their jobs because, you know, they didn't have enough focus, practical focus on that in their teacher prep programs.
Yeah, and what an
It's
interesting thing that leads back into friendship, right? And what you were
it,
saying about how we just as a society are not taught how to have and maintain these societal expectations from a young age.
mhm.
I know I keep interrupting you. I'm so excited. I didn't realize that I was going to be this fangirly about our conversation.
Well, it's an exciting conversation. I mean,
Yeah.
there are lots of others doing fantastic work in these
Yes.
areas too. I mean, it's absolutely critical, and I, you know, I love that our field has been focusing so much on intervention research and establishing evidence-based practices. That's important. You know, from where we have been historically, where there was less focus on that, and who knows what was happening in some
Yeah.
you know, classrooms. But you know, without these relationships with students and families, I mean, it's almost kind of sabotaging the effectiveness of some of the intervention work with evidence-based practices. And as you mentioned, a lot of the studies have been predominantly white students as well, and so we need to expand our research that way. Um,
Yeah.
you know, of course,
Yeah.
but I really, you know, I think that so I, you know, I hopefully, you know, you mentioned this and others are doing this work and it continues to expand that, you know, these relationships with students and families, caregivers, focusing on the social emotional outcomes and friendships for students, focusing on better, more regular communication with all families, is, you know, happening in our teacher prep work.
Yeah.
You know, I, with my colleague Janet Sauer, who's a professor at Lesley University, you know, we did write a book, affirming disability, strengths-based portraits of culturally diverse families, and I've heard from and Janet's ongoing research is about how professors are using this book in their teacher prep courses. So that's one direct and exciting and kind of, I sometimes just, you know, it's just exciting. Like we wrote
Yeah.
this book and it's being used in college
Yeah.
courses, and that's an influence that we're very excited about.
Yeah, I am certainly excited about it.
So, I'm in my 11th year here at BU. I worked for a few years before at Providence College, so I've been in the field for a little while. And so it's exciting to do work like this.
Yeah.
Related to the friendship research, one of the practical ways that I think the work has been influencing teacher practice is that the ARC of Massachusetts has had an ongoing project called Pathways to Friendship that is about promoting friendships between adults with and without intellectual and developmental disabilities. And one of the things they've done, in addition to their train the trainer model across the state and all of this other amazing work, is that they have produced 5 research to practice toolkits that are focused on how to make friends where you live, learn, work, play, and organize. And I wrote the how to make friends where you learn, the school-based research to practice toolkit. And so that's been widely distributed in Massachusetts. I think would be available for those outside of Massachusetts as well. But if you Google the Pathways to Friendship project at the ARC of Massachusetts, you can find those toolkits.
I have it right on my list.
Yeah.
So you you spoke briefly about how you are, you're not a rookie here, right? So I'm interested, what sort of diversity and equity issues have been challenging for you personally? You spoke a little bit about your brother and some of that family background. Can you speak some to issues that you have either had personally within this field or that you have felt have impacted you kind of on a peripheral level personally?
Yeah, I might be an example of some of the problems of whiteness in special ed and disability related research, because when I started out with the personal experiences I had, I got into the field and I started doing this work related to my brother. And so I thought of, equity and diversity in terms of him and other students with extensive and pervasive support needs, because they're often, even within, or not even within special education practice and research, they're the students who are eligible under the categories of intellectual disability, multiple disabilities, autism, are among those who are the least included, most segregated, most stigmatized. And when I talk to families and do the friendship work, don't have friends. If anything, have helpers, and have the least engagement in the general ed curriculum. There are lots of low expectations. So I oriented my diversity, kind of equity and inclusion work in inclusive education for these students who were segregated. And admittedly, a lot of that work, and it's something I'm working on friendships, has been with white students with intellectual and developmental disabilities and white families in predominantly white schools for a number of reasons. Some related to funding or just opportunity, but some related to the work I did and didn't do in terms of who I was connecting with and things like that. And so I have learned with and from families here in Boston, about kind of racial, ethnic, cultural, linguistic identities and experiences and diversity. And so have expanded, my focus in those ways. I'm grateful to the folks that I've learned from and with and continue to work with. I guess I would say for other researchers who, might look like me or share identities and have had, certain privileges and kind of haven't thought through some of these issues. Like my default always it had been kind of severe disability, thinking about equity work. And it's only recently in the last, well, pretty much, yeah, like since I've been at BU, last 10 years or so, and even more recently as I continue to learn, that I kind of catch myself and recognize a lot of times when that default is severe disability, if I'm not being proactive and self-reflective, it's like white severe disability.
Right.
And so, I think that part of that question, I think, was how to overcome those. And I think, being proactive, being self-critical and self-reflective and has been really important. And like I said, learning from and with others. One of the specific things that I did was partnered with the PTI, the Parent Training and Information Center here in Massachusetts, and particularly with their cultural outreach brokers or cultural outreach coordinators who work with specific cultural and linguistic groups, other family groups, and other community-based organizations that are doing this equity work with immigrant refugee families, low SES families, has been really important in terms of, like I said, learning from and with and developing relationships so that, as I've moved forward, that the research is not as Stapleton and James in their 2020 article wrote, like not another all-white study, right? Predominantly white families or predominantly white students by me,
capable and able
white researchers.
Yeah.
So, so that's really important and needs to happen because a lot,
I agree with that. And a follow-up piece to this question was going to be, and if you don't mind, I'm going to kind of answer it for you, right? Because you've already done it. What advice would you give to junior scholars interested in similar research? And I would gather from what you have said, that would be to really be cognizant of those things from the beginning, and to understand that history of research really does focus on white families and children from a certain SES and certain area of town and certain educational background. Do you agree with that?
Yes, completely. A lot of research in special ed and related education psychology, has been predominantly white samples, predominantly white researchers. I think from the beginning, thinking about, like the family's research, for the most part, the research shows, and we probably know anecdotally from our own experiences, that many families are not completely satisfied with their child's IEP or the IEP process. Of those who are, it's been predominantly white, upper SES, English-speaking families. And like, COVID showed us, like if things are difficult across the board because of the structures and systems in our society, they're likely harder for Black families, for brown families, for immigrant families, for families who are learning English, new to the system and not used to advocating. Like, and that's what we're seeing. And so we need, to be aware of that and to continually, as I mentioned, to continually self-reflect, develop relationships. In that same Stapleton and James article, and lots of folks are talking about this. Like, as a white researcher, I need to do more work and uncomfortable work at times, to be critical and to kind of rethink, like, in what ways might I be participating in these ongoing problems of whiteness and ableness in special ed research? How can I stop that? How can I address this? How can I, and so, who's on my research team? Who are we bringing in as doctoral students? Who, I mentioned the co-construction with our families in our research, and I think part of my work has been, trying to center families that have been, and voices that have been traditionally marginalized, and yeah, I think there are lots of ways that the other thing I would say, I just glanced at my notes. So I've tried to, partner with lots of community organizations doing this work, and I truly mean partner. Like we I often present or support families or these groups in different ways, and students in our courses, volunteer to help out at events, maybe, kind of watch children with disabilities while the parents have their monthly meeting, is kind of a system with a few community organizations and things like that. So it is a partnership, which is important for researchers, working with community groups and families. But I often worry about families who aren't able to participate or still don't know about some of these groups, right? Because even in these groups that are, it's probably the tip of the iceberg. I mean, there are over 6 million kids with disabilities and IEPs and IEP meetings in our country, right? And it's probably the tip of the iceberg, the families who are able to be involved in these groups. And so I've been thinking a lot lately, about developing relationships outside of even these, formal community-based organizations, and going into communities. And I think that's really important as well.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I, it's such an important conversation to be having. I think that on the back end of such a huge shift within education because of the pandemic, we kind of have this beautiful opportunity, right, to reassess some things that were really spotlighted, and those things weren't new to us, right? Like we knew that that certain pockets of our communities had difficulty accessing internet services, right? And then when it was spotlighted because of the pandemic, I try to really look at it from a lens of, okay, was that the way that we wanted it to happen? Absolutely not, but it has happened now. And so now we can use some of this momentum going forward to really make sure that we can keep that spotlight on until all of those shadows are a little bit clearer.
Yes. Oh, definitely. I mean, I don't think I've mentioned, I mean, there are, I think people are probably familiar to some degree with some of the barriers that families face, but like some of the barriers are, or could be immediately fixed and should be immediately fixed. Like, the problems with translating evaluation and IEP materials and getting it to families in time for their meeting and having interpreters. Like, school districts know the languages that are spoken in their communities and have known for years, and so need to make sure that things are getting translated and that families have interpreters who understand special ed and both languages at their meetings. The fact that this is still not happening is a problem. And so I think, with the problems of the last couple of years, like the benefit, as you said, is shining this light, and this needs to happen. And, I feel for administrators to a degree with limited budgets and this and that, but like, figure it out. That's your job.
Right.
And maybe, you know, join in the advocacy and help get IDEA fully funded, or help get more resources to schools that need them. Like these are that it shouldn't rely on parents advocating who maybe, you know, initially, and a lot of research, mine included, initially, especially if they're immigrants to the family, new to the country, don't know about IEPs, don't know that they can and should advocate for translation and interpretation. Like
Right.
that's a, you know, so
Yeah.
yes, shine the light on all of
Yeah. Yeah. Um, yes, I feel like we could go on about that for a very long time. So I'm just going to shift focus a little bit to talk about TED and the diversity caucus, right? So
Yeah,
you're going to be a panelist in November in Richmond for the diversity caucus, and we're thrilled to have you and others to really open up these conversations a little bit more broadly. Can you talk briefly about your my assumption is that you're also excited to be part of the panel. So can you talk a little bit about that and what you hope the role of organizations such as TED, such as the Diversity Caucus, can have within the conversation of navigating some of these equity issues that you've spotlighted?
yeah, I am incredibly excited. I was part of TED and attended a few conferences in grad school years ago, and for, you know, just maybe the problem of too many conferences, I haven't been back until recently, so I'm thrilled. Um, you know, I think that I I think you know, the way my sense of TED and the Diversity Caucus specifically, is that, you know, that they are focusing that spotlight on these issues that, you know, we've known about for a while, but haven't really addressed specifically. And so I think the teacher prep aspect of this, I think applied research, and kind of addressing the research to practice gap, and specifically addressing these issues of equity, and diversity and inclusion are, I think, have been, from my perspective, the focus of, the Diversity Caucus, and will continue to be. And so, not just should we engage in this work, and, you know, like getting past that why question, but to actually how to engage in anti-racist and anti-ableist intersectional research and practice,
Yeah.
and challenging all of us, you know, because we can't do it all, and we have grown up in the ways that we grew up, and have, you know, aspects of this work that we're still learning about. So I think, you know, a lot of times in, you know, broadly speaking, you know, in some of this work, diversity refers to maybe race, ethnicity, culture, language, and forgets about disability. And I certainly in special education, you know, students with more significant support needs are, like I said, often, you know, forgotten about in some ways, segregated, etc. So that's important. And you know, for those of us who have focused on severe disability, in particular, and that might be our default without thinking through some of the racial, ethnic, cultural, linguistic, intersections, you know, being self-reflective and critical. And I think, you know, I see the role of the Diversity Caucus as, you know, collaborating, in a lot of this work, teaching each other, and kind of being, I'm this wasn't, I'm kind of forgetting the term, but being a critical friend, is that,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
like being, as we collaborate in this work, being a critical friend.
Yeah.
And you know, I've it can be hard, but we, you know, as I said earlier, we need to, you know, get uncomfortable, and welcome
Sure.
those critiques of our own work.
Yeah. I think, you know, you mentioned that we need to shift from asking why to asking how. And I would even offer up that maybe we shift from asking why to asking why haven't we? Why
Right.
haven't you done it yet? And I think that, asking those types of questions of one another in a gently critical way, and sometimes not gently, right? Like
Yeah.
sometimes we just need to call it out. Um, and asking that of ourselves as well, really can do a lot more good than just the why question. And
Definitely.
get rid of some of those fear-based expectations that we have of ourselves. So I'm going to wrap up here.
Yes.
We're always interested to know, we've talked about what you've written, and you've spattered in here a couple of times, folks that you're reading to, Stapleton and James and others.
Yeah.
Who are some up and coming scholars that you're reading currently? And leading into this question, because I'm pretty sure I know what some of your answer might be to this, but are you seeing some, to talk a little bit about that intersectionality piece? Are you having or seeing yourself having some conversations with caregivers and family members and community members regarding things like gender identity, or things like sexual identity, and how are those? Do you see yourself being able to navigate those within the line of your research? I'm interested to hear. As an LGBTQ plus community member myself, it's always something that is at the forefront of my mind when we're talking about these intersectionality pieces. So if you can speak to that a little bit.
Well, definitely, and I'm just realizing too, I think I've kind of consistently mentioned like racial, ethnic, cultural, linguistic, and haven't mentioned gender or sexual identity or kind of representation. And I think that needs to be part of this work for sure. I do want to mention, I have two answers. The second will kind of get back to work focusing on those identities. I wanted to quickly mention, and that she's not necessarily new or up and coming, but I absolutely love Maria Choi Pena's work. She's an assistant professor now at UPenn, University of Pennsylvania. Her work is incredible. Centers the experiences of Spanish-speaking mothers of emergent bilingual children labeled as disabled. It's theoretically grounded in discrit, disability critical race studies, ratiolinguistics, and intersectionality, in what she terms a critical disability ratiolinguistic or CDR perspective. And I just bought her book, Mothering Labeled Children,
Yes.
Bilingualism and Disability in the Lives of Latinx Mothers. So she's someone that I eagerly await her next scholarship. But and then the other person I thought of in terms of this question, and it's a little nepotistic, but I'm a proud advisor, is one of our doctoral students here at BU, Oscar Hughes. Oscar's a former special ed teacher, and his dissertation is which he's working on right now, is a participatory and inclusive research project with LGBTQ plus individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities, and looking at perspectives and experiences, and there are many aspects I'm so impressed by in his work, based on things that were difficult, barriers, and sometimes abusive experiences. What do LGBTQ plus adults with IDD wish they had? And so with an advisory board and co-researchers, he's been engaged in this work, and they're developing a guidebook for families and service providers about how to support LGBTQ plus individuals with intellectual and or developmental disabilities. The other aspect, the methods are fantastic, inclusive, participatory project. And the other aspect that I absolutely love are kind of initial findings and purposeful attention on joyful and positive experiences, not just kind of the negative experiences or possible victimization, but really kind of embracing identities and articulating the joy that LGBTQ plus individuals with IDD have shared.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's really exciting work. He actually has written an article that's in Inclusive Practices, which is Tash.
Yeah.
Tash's new practitioner journal titled Supporting Gender Self-Determination for People with IDD, which I'd urge people to check out.
Yeah, I have the privilege, and I say that without hesitation, the privilege to interview Oscar in the same capacity that we're doing here, and he is delightful. He's a delightful human, and his work is really, the only word that I can think of, well, I can think of many, but the word that comes to mind first is moving. That the work that he's doing is really powerful. So
yeah, I would agree with all of that. Skilled and committed researcher. He from the start of his time here, reached out and volunteered and developed relationships with local self-advocacy groups and has really and within which there was an LGBTQ plus focused subgroup and in terms of community-based research and inclusive research, he's really been a model and taught me many things, and I can't wait to see the outcome of this work.
Yeah. Dr. Rossetti, this has been truly a pleasure. I have multiple notes. I feel like at this point, I probably need to put you in my acknowledgements section of my dissertation. It truly, again, has been a pleasure. I am thankful that you have agreed to join us here, and I'm so grateful that the larger community gets to have a chance to hear you speak at TED in November.
Well, thank you. As well. This has been really fun. I'm looking forward to being at TED in November and being part of the panel and learning from the others on the panel and participating in that session for the Diversity Caucus and the larger conference. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. And I guess the only thing that I have left to say, oh, look, I stopped myself. The only thing I have left to say is, what do you say? Go Red Sox? Would that be appropriate?
Well, go Bruins. Go Bruins.
Oh yeah.
The hockey season started. The Red Sox were pretty bad this year.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you as well.